I'm Leanna. I'm a law student here at UNC. And a part in your talk that reminded me of an experience I had recently, the part where you said you were talking about how authors very often take quotes and misconstrue them in a way to dismiss the person as a whole. I was in an interview recently where I mentioned in passing that I had listened to an audiobook about Winston Churchill. And the person interviewing me asked me whether I had a positive or negative reaction to him. And I kind of, said some of the things that made me have a positive reaction to him. And he followed up with asking whether I had considered in my positive attitude toward Winston Churchill about how he had done all these terrible things in Africa and Burma, and whether that changes my opinion at all. And I was wondering what you would say, like if you read it in a paper or in a book, that's one reaction you can have. But if you're confronted with it in a professional setting or in a more intellectual setting, how do you react to that kind of criticism?
It's horrible. It's a terrifying example. As I always say, Dante got it wrong. There's always another circle. I mean, one problem from this is that, you were listening to a book. If somebody says, have you considered all of these other ideas? You might do with some people, but nobody can do with everyone. Like, we can't all become experts in everything. I mean, it's an expectation in the internet age that we are, you're an expert in ivermectin and also lockdowns and also COVID and also history and all biology and everything. It's too much. None of us can really do this. The best shorthand way to do it, without getting specific, although I will come back to the specifics on Churchill, the best shorthand way to do it is to say, can we not look at people in the round? I mean, one need not have a hagiographic attitude towards somebody, nor a totally dismissive attitude towards somebody. Being kindly to figures in the past and trying to understand them is necessary, among other things, because it's a preemptive request to the people who come after us to be kind to us in turn. We would want our successors to try to understand us. I mean, I have an editor, for instance, The Spectator in London, who always says to me he doesn't always say to me, he said it to me, that every single era in history does stuff that we think is insane, and we just don't know why they do it. What were they thinking of? Like, what were the Spartans thinking of when they did this? What were the Victorians thinking of when they were shoving children up chimneys? What on earth? Don't they realize you're not meant to shove children up chimneys? You don't do that anymore. Now we look at that and we think, why didn't they know that? My friend and editor's point is, he says, assume, since that's been the case with every civilization and every era in history, assume we are doing things now that our successors will look at with bafflement and say they were doing what in the 21st century, and try to work out what those things are now. And this is a very interesting challenge, actually, and it's one of the reasons why anyone here who's a writer or wants to be a writer, there's a lot to do. But on the specific of Churchill, by the way, it's a very interesting one. He's an example, like Jefferson, of somebody whose reputation has turned in a very short time span. There are a set of allegations against Winston Churchill which do the rounds now. Some of them are true. He said some things that undoubtedly by modern standards we would regard as racist. He had Victorian attitudes about a whole range of things because he was born in the Victorian era. I mean, if he had Victorian attitudes and he was born in, 2010, we might think it odd, but he was born at the height of Victorian England. But the specifics of the ones, as well as there being things that are said about Churchill that are true, there are criticisms made of him now that are wildly untrue. For instance, it's claimed that he was responsible for the Bengal famine in 1943, the terrible, terrible famine. He had no responsibility, obviously, for the cyclone that caused the famine, and did everything he could at the height of the war to get grain to Bengal from Australia. Thousands of people died, but it was not Winston Churchill's fault that they died. But here's the bigger thing in a way, which is even if they had, even if Churchill didn't do enough to avoid the famine in 1943, when Japanese and German U-boats were patrolling the oceans, it should count as something in a man's favor if he does more than any other human being to destroy fascism. It should be on the positive side of the ledger. And, anyone who knows their mid-20th century history knows, and anyone who knows their British history knows, it was not inevitable that Britain was going to go the way that Churchill wanted it to go in the 1930s. Very strong opinion at a very high level that wanted appeasement. If Britain had gone with appeasement or had been invaded, there is almost no doubt that everything in the 20th century and indeed the 21st century would be utterly different. If Britain had not held out in the crucial year of 1940, principally because of Winston Churchill, Britain would almost certainly have fallen into Nazism or had to do a deal with fascism, and the whole continent would have gone fascist. And America, if it hadn't ended, America didn't want to enter the war at that point. So I'm amazed, as I say, that when you weigh these things up, I want to say to some of these people, like, who do you think you are? I suppose just one other thought on that, because I was interviewing Andrew Roberts, who was Winston Churchill's best living biographer. I was interviewing him recently for this series, and I realized something from the discussion that hadn't really come to me before, which was this. One of the fascinating things about taking down really great people, really great men and women, people like Churchill, I would say like Lincoln, like Jefferson. One of the problems is it demotivates your society. And what I mean by that is, if you recognize that individuals being courageous changes the course of human history, then you not only have something to admire, but something to aspire to in your life. It says you also could have a great contribution to give to the world, to your country, to your nation. You too can write your name in the book of history. Now that's an inspiring thing, and it has fueled people for generations. But if you say even Churchill is to count for nothing, then what is the point of any human endeavor? Nothing could ever be good enough in that case. No one could be pure enough. In which case, what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning? I'm serious. I think that this has a highly demotivating effect on a society, which is why it has to be tackled.
What Douglas is mentioning is so true, that there are coordinated attacks that are now being done. These verbal drive-by attacks by the left, by progressives, by many Democrats, even liberals for that matter, that are attacking our heroes of the past, in the distant past and even in the not so distant past, attacking our founding fathers, attacking people like Winston Churchill, who time and time again has always been voted as the most famous, the most important Britisher to have ever lived, eclipsing that of kings and queens in terms of stature. The drive-by attacks have also occurred here on this side of the Atlantic against George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and so many others, judging them through the lens and the prism
I will take it as a cynical comment. If I've read you correctly.
Final two questions.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Colby McQuaid. I'm also from the law school. And you talked about people giving bad advice and what their true intentions are. And today it feels that those who kind of demonize America's history and don't want to help, they kind of want to tear it down. And that being said, we all know that we're in a culture war, and it feels like they're playing a game of if I can't have it, no one can. And further, I'd argue that the culture is controlled by the other side. We're losing right now. So when does it approach a point where we also start to think maybe we should tear it down? Maybe we need to restart. So like, how do we avoid a true culture war?
Well, it's a very good question. As I say, it's sort of slightly return to what I said in my main remarks, which is I do think it's just absolutely crucial to agree on some things. I mean, I'm very, very concerned about this country's attitude towards elections. There's no other developed democracy in which people don't agree who won the election. And I mean, none. There is no movement in Britain that thinks that Labour Party won the 2019 election. No. Now, if you cannot even agree on elections, I just can't understand why there isn't some cross-partisan effort just to like work out how to do it better and cleaner and whatever, and just agree on it. Say, look, just for the health of the republic, it's just deeply desirable that at least this. And the reason why is because if the person who wins needs to know they've won, but it's really important that when somebody loses, they know they've lost, because then you can correct, you can change, you can adapt, you can think about what you got wrong and why you were rejected. So losing is an incredibly important thing to do, as is winning. But I do worry about where this country is going on that. I always urge against the burn it down, but I do think that the most important positive thing people can do is to build it up. I mean, you always in America have had, much more so than in Britain or Europe, you have always had this ability and this tradition to start things anew, to start new institutions. I mean, what are all these glorious universities and campuses but the visions of small numbers of people, sometimes one person, to start something small that sometimes, of course, grows gargantuan and has millions of HR people and all sorts of other things, but not necessarily in the vision of the founders. But I digress. In general, that is the story of America. It is of people founding things. And if you don't like the ones that are there, doing it anew. And I'm confident in this. I mean, even with the universities in this country, some people say, they don't like this university, they don't like this system, they think this is rotten. What happens in America? People will start new universities, and they already are,
Hello, my name is Simone Lonsane. I'm a freshman at UNC, which is a word that has now been deemed sexist, so we've replaced it with first year. I'm studying biology and public policy. And my question for you is, recently we've seen a drastic increase in social media posts and accounts being fact-checked and taken down for information that is deemed false. What role, if any, do you believe the media has in providing factual information to the public? Additionally, what is more important on social media platforms, the freedom to express a dangerous opinion or the preservation of safety and decorum on a public platform?
That's a good and very pertinent question. I spent a certain amount of time the last year concentrating on Twitter because I've had the opportunity to see some of the back workings of what's been going on. I was with the CEO of Twitter, Parag, on the day that Elon Musk pulled out of the deal, and subsequently saw what came out in the Twitter files. And I'm confident that under different leadership, in any case, everybody is still wrestling with exactly the question that you raise. My view is that there's only two ways you can go with social media moderation, as with any other form of publishing. Effectively, you come back to the argument of Milton on publishing in the 17th century, which is you either allow for, as it were, dangerous opinion, or you decide to restrict opinion. And that's, broadly speaking, those are the only two options you have in front of you. Now, if you decide to restrict opinion, you have to come up with a very wise council of men and women and others who will guide the human species accurately through all the storms that come. Now, I don't know if you know anyone good enough for that role, but I don't. I mean, I have jokingly said to people at Twitter, I wouldn't trust myself to be a content safety moderator. I wouldn't trust myself, let alone a 22-year-old virgin in Silicon Valley. I don't see who could ever have the power that these people have wielded. And wielded secretly. That's one of the worst things with Twitter in particular, you know, not telling people we have these tricks we can do behind the scenes. So my own view is that between these two things, looking for the incredibly holy, brilliant group that will magisterially solve all problems and tell us what is true, or noisy, messy, dirty at times, but that's the deal. That's the bar you walked into. I'd rather have the second every time. And, you know, if I want decorum, I don't go to Twitter. If I want decency, I don't go to Twitter. But we're adults. We're not children. One of the fundamental problems of the age is the infantilization of adults, as if we are children. Children, it's a totally different thing. But once you're an adult, you have to be able to put up with things. You have to not be fragile, and you have to be able to choose where you go in your life. And if you want to go to a raucous party, virtually or actually, go to the raucous party. And if you want a decorous tea party, go to a decorous tea party. And everyone can have their own fun. But as I say, of the two options, that's the only one, it seems to me, at all viable. But thank you. It's a very important question.
That's a great one to end on, Douglas, as we head off.